The first thing that struck me about that stretch of forest was how quiet it was. Too quiet for midsummer in the Ozarks. The cicadas hummed half-heartedly, and the wind barely stirred the tops of the pines. I was a week into a contract job, hired to verify some survey lines along the southern edge of the Mark Twain National Forest, where it butted against private land. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills, and solitude never bothered me. My little canvas tent was pitched near a creek that trickled lazily through limestone outcrops, and I'd been working my way north with my transit, compass and notepad. Old school methods that still got the job done. That morning, I followed a line that should have taken me to a century-old boundary marker, one of those cast iron posts with the Forest Service emblem stamped into it. Instead, I found a clearing, roughly rectangular, maybe the size of a baseball diamond. The underbrush had been hacked down recently, and tyre tracks cut through the mud. I crouched by the tracks. They were fresh, no more than a few days old. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and something mineral, sharp and metallic. At first, I thought it might have been a local farmer accidentally crossing the line, but the deeper I looked, the stranger it got. There were piles of shale and quartz fragments, tailings the kind you'd see near a mine entrance. Someone had been digging, not deep maybe, but enough to churn up soil. Then I noticed the trees. A half-dozen oaks had been felled, their stumps hidden under brush. The logs themselves were gone. Illegal logging wasn't uncommon, but this felt different, organised, deliberate and quiet. The old boundary marker stood half-buried near the clearing's edge, but the top had been sheared clean off, as if someone didn't want it recognised. I brushed dirt from the stump of iron and felt a chill crawl up my spine. I'd walked through abandoned mining claims before, places where men with bad luck and worse judgment had hacked at the hills for a dream of silver or zinc, but this wasn't old. The cuts on those stumps were still sap-wet. I marked the coordinates on my map and glanced up the slope where the tracks led. The forest closed in thickly there, and sunlight slanted through in sharp bars, catching on a faint haze of dust. Somewhere up ahead, I heard the faint cough of an engine, too small for a truck, maybe an ATV. My first instinct was to call it in, but I remembered I was 20 miles from the nearest ranger station with no cell signal and no backup. Instead, I stepped off the trail, crouched low and waited. The sound drew closer, then stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. I could feel my heartbeat echoing against my ribs as I stared through the pines. That's when I saw movement, two figures barely visible between the trunks, hauling something wrapped in a blue tarp toward a makeshift trailer. I stayed crouched in the brush, barely breathing. The two figures moved with the kind of rhythm that comes from routine. They'd done this before. One was short and wiry, the other broader, with a limp that made his gait uneven. They talked just loud enough for me to catch the cadence, not the words. I could see the tarp bulging oddly in the middle, maybe tools or ore sacks. Whatever they were hauling, it wasn't just timber. When they loaded it into the trailer, the taller one wiped his face with a rag and scanned the clearing. I froze as his eyes passed within yards of where I hid. A cicada shrieked from somewhere above, startlingly loud. My pulse jumped, but the man just spat in the dirt and muttered something. They climbed onto the ATV, the engine coughed again, and the machine rattled off toward the ridge, disappearing into the trees. I waited a long time before standing. My knees ached from crouching and sweat rolled down my back. When I finally stepped into the clearing, I saw where they'd been digging. A shallow pit gaped near the far edge, maybe 5 feet wide, with dark soil streaked by veins of something glittering. Mica maybe, or quartz. There were empty sacks, tossed nearby, marked aggregate sample, like they'd lifted them from a construction site. It didn't look like much, but I knew the land here was rich with old mineral seams. Someone had found one worth the risk. Part of me wanted to turn around, hike straight out and forget what I'd seen. My job was to confirm boundary markers, not play sheriff, but I couldn't ignore it. If they were cutting into the National Forest, the fines alone would ruin them, and whoever was behind it probably knew that. I took out my field notebook, sketching the clearing and jotting down what I'd found. Just as I tucked the notebook away, I caught sight of something nailed to a tree, an old sun-bleached sign. Only half the letters remained, but I could make out US Forest Property, no entry. Beneath it, fresh gouges scored through the words, and someone had scrawled in marker, "Stay out." That settled it for me. I'd hike back to camp, head out at first light and report the site. I packed my gear, slung the transit over my shoulder and started back down the ravine. The air had cooled, shadows long and thin. A whip-poor will called somewhere close. Then, from behind me, 2 sharp cracks echoed through the trees. Not thunder, not a branch, gunshots. I hit the ground instinctively, dirt in my teeth, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Bark splintered from the trunk beside me. Whoever was up there knew I'd been watching. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my pack and crawled downslope, keeping low among the ferns and deadfall, every sense alive with the sudden terrible knowledge someone out here was willing to kill to keep their secret. I slid and stumbled through the ravine, half crawling, half running, my boots finding no purchase on the damp leaves. Every sound behind me, snapping twig, rustle of brush, sent a jolt through my nerves. The forest had turned hostile, closing in with shadows thick enough to choke on. I kept low, weaving between fallen trunks and boulders, heading toward the creek that ran near my camp. Water meant noise, cover, and a path to follow out. When I finally reached it, the creek was little more than a dark ribbon glinting in the dusk. I crouched beside it, gulping down air, trying to think. My tent and gear were still half a mile downstream. If they'd seen me, they might have followed. I needed to move fast, but not foolishly. I tore the bright orange bandana from my pack, no sense waving colour out here, and shoved it deep in my pocket. Then I started moving again, keeping to the water's edge, the cold currents soaking my boots and pants. The forest grew quiet again, that eerie, listening kind of silence. I forced myself to slow down, listening. Nothing but the gurgle of water and the distant whip-poor will's call. Maybe they'd fired just to scare me off. Maybe they didn't even know who I was, but I'd seen their faces, their equipment, too much to risk leaving a witness. I rounded a bend in the creek and nearly tripped over something glinting in the mud. I knelt and brushed it clean. A brass shell casing, still warm, my stomach turned. They weren't shooting to scare me. They were hunting. The sun was almost gone now, the woods shifting from green to black. I pushed onward, forcing through the undergrowth until the faint shape of my tent appeared across a narrow glade. Relief washed over me for half a second, until I saw the flap hanging open, swaying in the breeze. I hadn't left it that way. I crouched behind a fallen log, heart hammering, scanning the shadows. My lantern was gone. So was my map case. My gear had been rifled through, the mess visible even in the low light. Whoever had done it had come here fast and recently. A faint smell of cigarette smoke lingered, cutting through the scent of pine and damp soil. A twig snapped somewhere to my left. Not an animal, slow, deliberate. I sank lower behind the log, forcing myself to stay still, though my muscles screamed to run. 2 shapes emerged near the tent, the same men from the clearing. The shorter one carried a rifle slung loose in his hands. The tall man was holding something. My notebook. He flipped through it, muttering, then ripped a page out and tossed the rest to the ground. "This one's seen too much," the tall one said, his voice low but clear enough. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I turned and bolted into the dark woods, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes. Behind me came shouts, then the engine's whine as they fired up their ATV again. They knew I was unarmed, alone, and on their ground. The chase had begun. I ran until my lungs burned and the forest tilted sideways in the dark. The ATV's growl rose and fell behind me, bouncing off the ridges, like a hunting hound on scent. Every instinct screamed to stay quiet, but the brush was too thick, the ground too rough. I tripped over roots, slid down a slope slick with moss, and landed hard on my shoulder. Pain flared through my arm, but I bit it back and scrambled to my feet. The moon had just started rising, a thin sliver casting silver on the creek. I could use that. Water masked my trail, and the banks grew steep near the eastern ridge. If I could follow it far enough, I might reach the old service road that paralleled the boundary line. From there, I could make it out to Highway 19 by morning. I waded into the current, cold biting through my boots, and began moving downstream, crouched low. The ATV sound grew fainter for a bit, then stopped altogether. That was worse. It meant they were off the machine and moving on foot. I slowed, listening. Somewhere back up the slope, a flashlight beam flickered through the trees, white and sharp. Another joined it. "Spread out!" one of them shouted. The creek curved again, and I spotted Salvation, a downed sycamore stretching over the water, hollowed at its base. I sloshed to it and crawled underneath, pressing myself into the cold mud, leaves clinging to my face. The beam of a flashlight swept the water, passed over me once, then again. I held my breath. A mosquito landed near my eye, and I didn't dare move to brush it away. Minutes passed. Then footsteps on gravel, slow, testing. One man muttered, "He's still close. Look at the tracks." Another voice, rougher, "Doesn't matter. He won't make it out tonight. We'll circle back at first light." Their footsteps faded into the woods. I waited longer than I thought I could until my muscles cramped and the night grew still again. When I finally crawled from under the log, I was shaking, half from cold, half from the realization that I was one bad decision away from disappearing into those hills forever. I followed the creek another mile before I dared stop. The forest here opened slightly and I found a cluster of boulders that offered some cover. My pack was lighter now, stripped of half my gear, but I still had my compass, a few protein bars, and a pen light. I tore a page from the back of my notebook and scribbled what I could remember, coordinates, descriptions, everything I'd seen, then sealed it inside a plastic sample bag and buried it beneath a rock. If something happened to me, maybe someone would find it. The woods whispered around me, owls calling, water murmuring. I tried to steady my breathing, but every sound felt like a threat somewhere out there. 2 men thought they'd erased a problem. I wasn't gone yet. By the time the stars wheeled overhead and the forest settled into midnight, I made my plan. Follow the creek until dawn, hit the service road, and get out. Simple. But in country like this, even simple plans have teeth. Dawn came thin and grey, the kind of light that doesn't warm you. It just reveals how cold the night really was. My clothes were stiff with mud, my boots soaked, but I was still breathing, still moving. The creek curved sharply, and I climbed out of it, shaking off the chill. Somewhere through the trees, I heard the first distant hum of an engine, maybe theirs, maybe a ranger's. Either way, daylight would give me away, so I kept to the shadows, following deer paths through the pines. The forest was waking up around me, woodpeckers hammering, jays calling, the smell of damp moss and crushed fern heavy in the air. I found the faint outline of an old access trail, overgrown but still visible if you knew how to read ground. That trail, I knew, ran east toward the service road. My legs trembled with fatigue, but I forced them on. As the slope levelled, the trees thinned, and there it was. The road. Faded asphalt, cracked and tufted with grass, but it might as well have been a lifeline. I crouched low at the edge, listening. Nothing but wind. I stepped out and started north, staying close to the ditch line, scanning for any sign of a truck. Then I saw movement behind me. A figure stepped from the trees, a silhouette in a wide-brimmed hat, rifle slung low. My stomach dropped. The tall man. He raised a hand, not quite pointing the gun yet. "You should have minded your own business, friend." My voice came out raw. "This is federal land. You're already done." He chuckled, the sound dry and mean. "Maybe, but you won't be around to tell it." Before he could shoulder the rifle, a new sound cut through the air, the rumble of a vehicle coming from up the road. A white pickup crested the hill, US Forest Service emblem on the door. The man froze, cursed under his breath, and melted back into the trees. I waved both arms, stumbling into the road as the truck screeched to a stop. The ranger who jumped out looked barely older than me, startled by the sight I must have made. Mud-caked, scratched, and shaking. I managed to get the words out. "Illegal mining site. 2 men, armed." Within an hour, there were more trucks, radios crackling, men fanning out through the woods. They never found the pair, at least not that day, but when they searched the clearing, the evidence was undeniable. Fresh excavation, stolen timber, fuel drums half buried under brush. The ranger told me later the land sat on a line of unregistered zinc deposits, nothing worth a company's effort, but plenty for a small crew looking to make quiet cash. I gave my report, and by evening I was on my way home, every muscle aching, mind still replaying the moment those gunshots cracked through the trees. Now, when folks ask about my fieldwork, I usually tell lighter stories, the time a raccoon raided my lunch, or when I got lost in fog near the Smokies. But sometimes, on nights like this, when the fire's low and the forest settles into that same too quiet hush, I think about that hidden clearing and the men who wanted it to stay secret. And I remember that out here, the wilderness doesn't always hide what's natural. It hides what people don't want you to find.